so we're going to talk about installing your externally routed dropper. So first step we're going to do is go ahead and install this into the frame, and we're going to want to set your height, so your full extension height here. Make sure you line up the saddle with the center line. You don't want it rotated one side or the other because we're going to determine our cable length based on this position. So you want to get this correct, get this aligned properly, and then we want to torque the binder clamp to 5 Newton meters. Okay, now our next step, we've got our cable housing all installed in our remote here, ready to go. And we're going to want to set the cable. Now depending on your frame, you may have cable guides somewhere on the frame, either on the top tube, there may be some that run down the down tube and up. Best thing to do is to check with your frame manufacturer or bike manufacturer and see what they recommend as far as cable routing for droppers. If you don't have any documentation or information on that, check with your local bike shop. If they've worked on your model of bike before, they probably have some ideas about routing the cable and what the best option would be. For this particular application, we're going to route it along the top tube. This bike doesn't have guides, so we're going to go ahead and use zip tie. So this is a zip tie, or also called the cable tie. You can get these at most hardware stores. We're going to go ahead and put those on. I'm not going to zip them down quite yet. I'm going to leave them just a little loose. Okay, now the next thing we want to talk about is cable slack. And when you've got your remote where you want it, making sure that the ergonomics are good and it's aligned and where you want it to live, we're going to check the cable slack. And the way we do that is you want to rotate the handlebar to full rotation and check and make sure that your cable isn't hanging up on anything. Okay, we'll go ahead and release it. Do that one more time, just double check. And that looks really good, so we'll go ahead and tighten down this zip tie here in the front. Okay, now the next step is going to be to figure out where we want the cable to sit. And what we want is we want a fairly gradual turn here. You wouldn't want the cable hanging way down like this, because that cable can get out of control, and especially when you drop the post, that extra slack's going to come down and your heel could get caught in it or something. So you want a minimal amount of slack, but you also don't want it pulled up, you know, something like that. You want a gradual bend. The other advice that I'll give you is, if you're running your own cable guides or zip ties in this case, if you divide your frame into thirds, the top tube here, you want to put one cable tie up fairly close to the front of, you know, the top tube near the head tube. But then if we divided it in thirds, 1, 2, 3, you don't want anything behind that back third. I've seen people run them way back here, and the problem you come into is that when it moves, it puts such a tight bend here that it actually binds up the cable. So as a general rule, divide it in thirds and put it in that third, and then we'll go ahead and tighten that down. Now you can either use a paint marker, or you can use, I'm just going to use a little piece of painter's tape. And we're going to, this doesn't look real smooth now because it's been rolled up for shipping, but that'll straighten out as the post is used a little bit. But see, that gives us a nice radius there. That's going to be nice and smooth. You can see that this is going to come down to here, so if we follow that same trail down, you can see that the cable actually has a nice path. It's not going to get in the way of anything. So we'll go ahead and mark it here. We're going to take the ferrule off because we're going to be trimming this housing. We want to reuse this ferrule, so set that aside. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the inner cable out of the housing about halfway. The reason we're doing that is if we were to cut that with the cable inside, you're going to cut the cable too short, and they'll both be the same length and you won't be able to use it. Next step we're going to do is go ahead and cut this with a good set of cable cutters. Take that tape off that you used to mark it, and we're going to look in the end and make sure we don't have any frayed area or anything in there that would cause a cable not to run smoothly. Then we're going to go ahead and push the cable through, seat it up in place. Now we'll put the ferrule on. Okay, now the next step is going to be to take your barrel adjuster and turn it all the way in. That way you've got maximum adjustment outward for cable stretch and such. Pull that tight and make sure there's no slack here. Okay? Now the next thing that I'll recommend, you can use either a measuring tape. We've got this little metric one probably from Home Depot. Most hardware stores will have one. Or a pair of calipers. The calipers are going to be the most accurate and probably easiest to use. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this lever arm and we're going to make it parallel. So you can see here it's parallel. And we'll just take a little measurement here. And we come up with 20 millimeters. So what we're going to do is take and transfer that 20 millimeter number here onto the cable. So we'll go from the ferrule, pulling the cable tight so there's no slack. We'll mark 20 millimeters right there. Now, we're going to take our cable stop. I'm going to slide it on. You want that cable stop to just cover that mark that you made. And then we're going to use a 1.5 Allen key. These might be a little bit hard to find with some tool kits, but if you get one of these little pocket Allen tools, they almost always have a little 1.5 included with them. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is not use a pair of bicycle cable cutters, but we're going to use a pair of diagonal cutters. These are just like a basic wire cutter. The reason we want to use that is this has a flat jaw on the bottom. We're going to lay that down right against that cable stop and cut it off flush. So now you got a clean cable stop there, nothing sticking out or frayed that's going to hurt anybody. But it also is going to give you more clearance between the top of this on that arm and the bottom of your saddle. If you were to leave a tail and your saddle hit it, it would do this and it could cause a malfunction of the post. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and hook it here, Then you've got a 1.5 set screw here, and you're going to wiggle that and make sure it engages properly. And you're just going to turn it until you start to feel a little resistance, and then turn it probably one more turn. And that's going to engage into the ferrule and lock it in place. Then you want to check here for any free play. If you feel any free play, you want to turn that barrel adjuster counterclockwise until you have no free play. You're ready to ride.